Okay, coming to you live from Paratus, Peru. Can you hear me okay? Okay, you can hear me okay? Great. Well, welcome to Paratus, Peru on a Sunday morning. And I just wanted to do an update with you. Thank you again for being subscribers to my YouTube channel. It's an honor for me to be able to share what it is that I'm studying with you. As regards DNA testing of the Paratus, we had a very successful GoFundMe campaign where we were looking for $3,000 in order to study the DNA, the mitochondrial DNA of two skulls, and we wound up receiving $4,000, so that's great. And the samples are already, of two skulls, are on their way to the lab in Canada right now. Cranial deformation and what would look to be a natural skull. And so what I'm going to show you are skulls from the Senior Juan Navarro Museum in Paratus, Peru. And hopefully, hopefully you'll be able to see the differences. So first of all, this is an example of cranial deformation. You can see that the volume of the skull is normal. This person was relatively mature, and then you see the flattening of the back of the skull here. So that flattening shows you cranial deformation. That's the flattening of the back of the skull and the flattening of the forehead. And also you see that the suture line, or sutures, this one coming across this way and this one coming back that way, that those are the characteristics of a normal human skull. So this is a Paratus culture. This is late on in the Paratus culture, possibly 100 BC to 100 AD. The Paratus disappeared about 100 AD due to decimation from the Nazca people who moved in to the area from the north. So this is cranial deformation. Cranial deformation soon ended after the arrival of the Nazca. Also, the red hair characteristic of the Paratus also disappeared upon the arrival of the Nazca. So I've already noticed that there have been many questions about the Nazca system, and it's more complex than most people realize. The Paratus system of geoglyphs and lines is not simply in Nazca itself. They begin at the Bay of Paratus with a giant candelabro, which is about 500 feet tall. It's a trident shape. And then it continues through an area called Palpa, where you have more than 1,000 geoglyphs. And then by the time you reach Nazca, the Nazca Plain, that's where the famous ones are. The astronaut was a creation of the Paratus culture. The ones in Palpa, in between Nazca and Paratus, were largely creations of the Paratus culture. The Nazca ones, in general, except for the astronaut and maybe the whale, were done by the Nazca culture. Now, the Paratus ones are much more playful and odd. Some look like the cross between an insect and a human being. That's where the runways, so-called runways, are. And I had a good conversation with Eric von Daniken. He and I flew over Nazca together for the series Ancient Aliens in March. And one thing he told me was, I never said they were runways. I said they look like runways. Also, there have been some comments about the about what's called the band of holes. If you just look up on Google Images or whatever, look up Pisco band of holes or Peru band of holes, you'll see there are 3,000 of these depressions in the ground that go up the spine of a mountain. And at the base, there's an ancient cemetery. So what it appears that it was, and this is, these holes are, each one's about the size of a hot tub. Again, there are at least 3,000, maybe 5,000 of them, and they appear to be in the shape of a snake or a serpent, with the head being where the cemetery was. And that, according to Senior Juan Navarro, was again a creation of the Paratus culture, not the Nazca culture. And the Paratus probably made that somewhere around 500 BC. And it's quite likely that what its function was that in each one of these holes, there was a plant. And so with careful watering of these plants, then from a distance, you would see this giant green serpent in the background. At least I think that's the most logical answer. The academic studies are, as usual, kind of superficial as regards that. Well, yeah, the astronaut is a very simple design, but it's three-dimensional, which is different because the Nazca figures, like the spider, is simply an outline. But the Paratus culture made the astronaut waving into the air, and it's dug down. The whole thing is a depression. So it was more complicated in terms of its construction than the normal Nazca figures. And also, if you carefully look at the Nazca figures, again, like the spider or the hummingbird, you'll notice that the line begins and then ends without reaching the beginning point. So there's like an entryway. And this was likely a ceremonial pathway used by the Nazca for rituals. And the whole story of the Nazca system is very complicated. It took course, or its construction, the whole system, happened between 500 BC and 500 AD. So from 500 BC to 100 AD, it was the creation of the Paratus people. And then from 100 AD to 500 or 600 AD was the work of the Nazca civilization. Now, the Nazca underwent climate change, which began about 100 AD. That's what forced them out of their homeland and forced them to invade the Paratus territory to the south. The Paratus were experts at desert agriculture. The food that is produced here today is from the same fields that date back almost 3,000 years. So the Nazca were not farmers, and due to the fact that they weren't good farmers, and also the fact that they were suffering from desertification of the area, they were forced out of the area around 600 AD. And so they didn't mysteriously disappear. They didn't leave in spaceships or anything like that. They simply had to abandon the area because they could no longer sustain their population. So now let's have a look at a different skull. So here we have a Paratus elongated skull, and it's not very big because this individual, who was likely a female, died out at about 7 to 8 years of age. And the interesting characteristics are the back of the skull is curved, and then you have this interesting bulge area here. And so those, contrary to the cranial deformation that we saw earlier, this could very well have been someone who was born with an elongated skull. Notice how large the eye sockets are compared to normal. And the sagittal suture, which is supposed to be here, is non-existent. So that's one of the curious things. You'll see this suture coming across this way, quite predominant. This one, it's not even there. And these two small holes in the back of the head are also indicative of the elongated skulls of Paratus, Peru, and also possibly up in Cusco among the much later Inca. And these little bones here too, these are anomalous bones. And they're called by academics Inca bones because the Inca culture had these, but the Paratus is a much older culture. It is possible that the Paratus migrated, those that survived, up to Cusco and became part of the Inca ancestry. Also, There's the foramen magnum, which is where your spinal column enters your skull. So you see, again, this is the one with cranial deformation. You see the flattening of the back of the skull here, and somewhat flattening here. No real bulge here. But then we have the foramen magnum, and that's this right here. That, again, is where the spinal column enters the skull. And it's somewhat farther back. It's farther back than a normal skull, but not extremely. But let's compare that with this one. Again, this one was about 7 or 8 years old. So you see the foramen magnum is much smaller than normal, and it's much farther back. So those are genetic characteristics. It's likely that this person had a longer neck than we do. And I know for some of you, that's going to sound like alien characteristics. Clinicians who examined this have figured out. Thank you very much, Paul, for your donation. That's very kind of you. I have this thing called Super Chat on, so if some people want, you know, it's an option for you. But this by itself means that the Paratus people were not Homo sapiens sapiens. They could breed with Homo sapiens sapiens, but they were likely a subspecies, and that's what has attracted us in terms of the DNA results, because as you likely know by now, and I'll go over it one more time here, all the DNA of Native American people from Mexico down to Patagonia, which is the southern tip of South America, the Paratus, and curiously, no academics want to study this because it's kind of earth-shattering information. But among the 18 skulls that were tested, one yielded no results whatsoever. So that could have been a contamination or a problem in terms of doing the sampling. But only 2 of them wound up, let's see, 1, 2, 3. 3 of the 17 that we got results from. Okay, questions about polygonal construction coming up. 3 of the 17 were mitochondrial haplogroup B. So that means native ancestry of South America. But the other ones were the following: U2E1, U2E, H1, HK, H2A, J1B1, and in some, H and R, and in some cases, 5 cases, unknown, which is, of course, very curious. So not only are we talking a subspecies at minimum, but also possibly something even more interesting. Thank you, Shermanator. So here, now we're going to see one of the most classic elongated skulls. Again, from the Senior Juan Navarro Museum in Paratus, Peru. So this is the classic Paratus elongated skull. Again, look at the huge size of the eye sockets. And then this looks like it could have been a blow to the head. This might have been what killed this person. Female, fully mature, and what are called the Inca bones. And then when we look at the suture lines, the suture line coming across here is 2 periods of construction. We have the Inca, which in most places, like Haitians, and the whoever were the creators at Pumapunku were a completely different people or beings, and the creators at in Egypt, again, completely different. Okay, hopefully the video signal has become more stable now. Do remember that I am living in very rural Peru. So it's only recently that we've even Paratus, Peru, and it's very similar in appearance to the Star Child skull. So this is definitely an upcoming candidate for DNA testing. We already have the museum said that we're allowed to take samples, and so that's in an upcoming DNA test. And this is another one. This is the one located in the Andahuaylas Museum outside of Cusco, called Waiki. And notice that the head is the size of the torso. So Waiki is in a private collection, private museum, and Senor Renato, who is the caretaker of the museum, has agreed to allow DNA testing of this one as well. So that will be upcoming. We'll be doing DNA tests of one skull every probably 2 to 3 months. And this just gives you another indication of what Waiki looks like. And one more photo. Very anomalous little life form. And this one we're hoping to also DNA test. It's located in a small museum on the shore of Lake Titicaca in Bolivia. And it's an intact, fully intact skeleton. I do, of course, have a video or a couple of videos about this. Look up Pata Patani on my YouTube channel, and you'll see 2 videos of this skeleton, and you'll see also analysis by 2 American physicians. One of them a neurologist, the other one a radiologist. Both were quite blown away by what they saw. Also, this little one used to be on display in the museum in La Paz, Bolivia, but is no longer on display. I'm still trying to get access to it. But again, its head was the size of its torso. And this is a little fetus that, according to radiologist Ken, died between 7 and 9 months in the womb of the mother, was likely aborted. And the other curious thing is that here's another photograph of it. So you can see the head was the size of its torso. This is not cranial deformation. You can't cranially deform something in a mother's womb. And it was found in the same tomb as this one, a royal cemetery, royal tomb. So it's quite likely that these were mother and baby, and that both died prior to the baby being born normally. So I just thought you would like to see those photos. And now it's over to you. Do you have any questions for me or any thoughts or observations? Please type something. Yes, I do think that the people with elongated skulls, they had more brain mass than we have, so they were likely more intelligent than us, whether it was intellectual or psychic or whatever. We may never know, but again, that's why I live in the Paratus area, because I get to study them and go and visit the Nazca System. Yes, actually, the Akhenaten ancestors have been thoroughly studied. Many of the mummies are located in the Cairo Museum. Akhenaten's mummy has not been found, or if it has, it's not on display. Nefertiti's body is also not on display, possibly was never found. There was a major battle between Akhenaten and what was called the Amen priesthood, who were in charge of Egypt at that time. That's why he broke away from that group of people, because the Amen priesthood were the ones controlling the entire system of Egypt. And that's why Akhenaten moved his capital city from Thebes to his city of Akhetaten, and that's where he was found by the Amen priesthood and was likely murdered by them, and they took power over him once again. So what Akhenaten wanted to do was to take the civilization back to full enlightenment, which was called Aten, but the Amen priesthood chose to wipe that out. It's not that Akhenaten came up with the idea of one central deity or monotheism. He was actually bringing back a much more ancient system that existed in Egypt thousands of years before. Why do you think that part of the DNA is non-human? Well, it's not homo. To start with, it's as you saw from when I read out the results, the majority of the ones that were tested show ancestry not from the coast of Peru, not from Peru, and not from Mexico all the way down to Patagonia. So the only other group in the world that had skulls of equal size and were contemporary were ones that have been found in the Black Sea, the Caspian Sea, and Crimea area. And I cover that, of course, in my recent book called Beyond the Black Sea, available at Amazon. And all the DNA results are in quite in-depth explanation. Yeah, I don't know about this whole thing about elongated skulls and the banking system. Karen Hudis, who did this thing a couple of years ago about Homo capensis, which I think is a made-up term. I don't know about that. But what we do know is that the Paratus did die out about 2,000 years ago. There's no evidence that Akhenaten himself had an elongated skull, but he did have his artists portray his daughters and him as having them. So that is telling us that he's probably trying to tell us that the ancestry of his genetic line could go back to Osiris, possibly. Osiris is also shown as having an elongated head. Osiris may have been an alien from Sirius, I don't know, but that's why we go back to Egypt once every year. We're going in April to study all of this stuff once again, to uncover more secrets. Luckily, what's called the Osiris shaft is now open. It goes down 200 feet into the bedrock on the Giza Plateau. And so we were in there in March. We're going back in April. We've rented the Osiris shaft for 2 hours. And of course, there is an extensive video about it on my YouTube channel. Just type in Osiris shaft and you'll see 4K footage of that. Are we getting complete DNA? No, because this DNA is 2,000 years old. So the fact that we can actually get anything is quite amazing. But as DNA technology improves and the price goes down, then we'll be able to do a lot more testing. That's why this testing of the two skulls is about $3,000 US, whereas 5 years ago, it would have been more than 10 times that. Okay, questions about Atlanteans. I don't know if Atlanteans actually existed or not. They may have. Their homeland or homelands would have sunk below the ocean due to sea level rise 12,000 years ago, because the sea or the oceans of the world suddenly went up by more than 300 feet or 100 meters about 12,000 years ago. This has been proven scientifically. So rather than Atlantis sinking, the water simply rose. They would have had to have left if they could have, and it's quite possible that they wound up in locations such as the highlands of Peru and also Egypt. The giant sarcophagus. If you're talking about the wooden ones, there are two on display in the Cairo Museum. They are about 12 feet tall, and the proportions are that of a human, not actual height, but 12 feet tall. But the width would be in proportion to a normal humanoid. So it is possible that they are hiding giant skeletons somewhere in the warehouses in Egypt. It's not something they would put on display because it doesn't fit the paradigm of Egyptology. Egg-shaped skulls. I don't know. Egg-shaped heads. I'm not sure what that means. Yeah, there's a lot of forensic facial recognition of the elongated skulls. Look up on Google Marcia K. Moore, and you'll see the phenomenal reconstruction she's done, both in terms of computer imaging reconstruction, and also she took an actual skull and built it up with clay, and that one's called Cinnamon. And again, it's Marcia. Don't look really Native American. They look like a mix of different people from different parts of the world. I don't know what Wise Up is. Is that someone who has a channel? Have I been confronted by any resistance? Not really. It's more being ignored. For example, the DNA results of the practice are available to anyone who, or especially to academics who want them. No one has requested them. So far, no. That's why I'm putting out YouTube videos about it, because this information belongs to humanity. It doesn't belong to a small group of academics. No, nobody presently living in Peru would have Paratus DNA, highly unlikely, unless some were able to escape to Cusco and then became part of the forebears of the Inca. So that's possible, because there are some Inca people still alive. Only the royal family in Inca times were Inca. The general population were not Inca, so it's only royal people. Yeah, the thing about making electricity by fermenting animals in the Serapeum of Saqqara, I don't know about that. I think it's far more complex. It's clearly lost ancient high technology, and whoever made the Serapeum boxes, either a very advanced human civilization or aliens. I don't see any other options. Yeah, the Nazca more likely wiped out the Paratus people. Have I seen UFOs myself? Yes, I have. Here in Paratus, we've had sightings of glowing ball-like orbs, but in a coherent shape. It's not just like a light, it's like a glass ball. We've seen that a few times, and I also had a major sighting when I was in Hawaii of a metallic ship that was about 200 feet long. Okay, Liam, about Oaxaca. Monte Alban is an okay site to visit in Oaxaca, but the most interesting one is called Mitla, M-I-T-L-A. And there you find large shaped stones, rectangular, some 6 tons, one of them is 10 tons, another one is 18 tons. So that's lost ancient high technology in Mexico. And of course, we're going in February to explore Mexico more, because Palenque has evidence of lost ancient high technology, as does Teotihuacan, the huge site outside Mexico City. No, I do not believe the earth is flat. Cocaine traces found in Egyptian mummies, that's right. Again, that's information that some people are trying to cover up, but that could show that there was probably trade movement of the Egyptians to the eastern side of South America, and then they would have entered the Amazon system and traveled all the way to the western part of the Amazon, and then would have gone up into the highlands of Bolivia and Peru, and there they could have easily accessed coca to make cocaine from. That's the most logical idea. And tobacco as well, yeah. No, I haven't faced any backlash from academia. Again, they simply ignore me. I do have to recognize me, and I don't care, because it belongs to everybody on the planet. It doesn't belong to a small group of individuals. Yes, DNA in New Zealand tracing back to the Middle East, very true. There's a lady who lives there called Monica. She has genetically red hair, and she had her DNA tested, and she has something like 30% Persian DNA. So she has ancestry which isn't the standard people. Reincarnate, I'm not sure if reincarnation is real or not. Clearly possible. We found no evidence, or I haven't, of high-tech ships or any tools of high technology. It's probably being hidden away from the general public. There are no megalithic cultures in North America, as in USA and Canada, because USA and Canada, up until about 12,000 years ago, was mainly covered in 1 to 2 miles of ice. So that's why you don't find that. You do find the mound builders. That stuff was probably done after the end of the last ice age, but very complex structures that possibly the Native Americans didn't do. Great, thank you. If any of you know Joe Rogan, I would love to be on his program. He's a very smart man, and I will be in the Los Angeles area late May, early June of next year, because we're going back to Contact at the Desert, which is an incredible convention that will be at Indian Wells in California. And so I'd love to be on Joe's show if he would like to contact me. Here is my, I'll type in my email address. Okay, there's my email address. It's brian@hiddenincatours.com. Yes, the Paratus were taller than normal native people. It looks like the Nazca people averaged about 5'4" or 5'5". The Paratus were more likely about 5'10" to 6'2". The fact that they had red hair likely indicates that they had light, and also could very well have had green or blue eyes. Old. That's as far back as I can go. It's clear that the Inca 1,000 years ago, when they left Lake Titicaca, they discovered a megalithic city, which they call Cusco, which means the center or the navel or the center of the world. So they found the megalithic work there, and they built on and around it. The difference between Inca work and the megalithic work is night and day. I don't know if ETs were involved in the megalithic construction, but the stuff is so complicated, some of it could not be replicated today. So what alternative do we have? We have the so-called Atlanteans, or we have aliens, because some of the polygonal stonework could only be done today, maybe with computers three-dimensionally scanning and then being able to cut and shape the stones to interlock perfectly. Well, maybe it's just mystic knowledge. Maybe it's aliens. Copper is found in the Great Lakes area, and so there probably was copper trade thousands of years ago between Europe and the eastern part of North America. We're getting more and more evidence that people have been sailing the oceans of the world far longer than the Vikings or even the Polynesians. So, again, we've been lied to a great extent about our history, and it's about time that this stuff is unraveled and is shared with anyone who wants to hear the information. Yes, again, if you want to look at reproductions or reconstructions of the Paratus elongated skulls, look up Marcia K. Moore. I'll write it down. Whoops. So there it is, Marcia K. K. Moore. She has a website. She's a phenomenal fine artist, and she's doing ongoing reconstruction work as we speak. Stone up in order to be able to make any kind of concrete. So that would be very advanced technology. I think it's more likely that what happened was that there was a technology that was able to temporarily make the stone soft, as in marshmallow-like material. That's very advanced high technology. That's not something we can do today. I'm not so much of a conspiracy theorist in terms of that information being blocked by institutions or governments. It's all starting to leak out now anyway, so it's not going to matter eventually. The fact that the Osiris shaft is open is an indication that things are opening up. So again, the Osiris shaft descends 200 feet below the Giza Plateau, and it's carved out of limestone, which is not a hard material, but it's 200 feet down. You enter sideways, then down another ladder 100 feet, and then you descend down another ladder 60 feet, and the very bottom part is a crystal clear pool of water that contains a giant box weighing somewhere between 60 and 80 tons. So how was that hard stone box even moved into the shaft? How was the shaft made? Yeah, the Great Pyramid and the Great Pyramids of Egypt, there are 8 Great Pyramids in Egypt, not just 3. There's no way they were constructed by the dynastic Egyptians because they're simply too big, and the fitting of the stone is just too precise. The Great Pyramid, 2.5 million multi-ton blocks. That means if it was built in 25 years by the dynastic Egyptians, they would have had to have cut, shaped, moved, and set into place 1 block every 2 minutes. That's impossible. So it's more likely that they were originally constructed thousands before as energetic structures. And so again, that's why we're going back in April to study more. The Pharaonic people did bury their dead in areas on the Giza Plateau, but they buried them in chambers that they found already. The same thing with the Valley of the Kings. The giant shafts that come down that way, some of them are 300 feet or more long, and they could not have been constructed by the dynastic people. The dynastic people found them and simply used them as tombs, as well as the huge boxes that they found that are wrongly called sarcophagi. The dynastic Egyptians were able to make wooden sarcophagi and very crude human-sized sarcophagi, roughly out of granite. But the boxes that we find that are a precise construction located in such places as the Valley of the Kings and also the Serapeum at Saqqara are 40 tons, 60 tons, 80 tons, and up to 100 tons in size. And the stone likely came from Aswan, which is in the south of Egypt. That's 500 miles away from Giza. Yes, actually, Trey Smith did interview me a couple of years ago. Well, again, the cranial volume, if we look at this one, the cranial volume is about 25% larger than ours. So because of that, they did have a larger brain than ours. And once again, you see where the foramen magnum is, how far with us, it's located here. With them, it's located farther back. That's a genetic thing to balance the fact that the skull is larger and tends to want to move backwards. So that's genetics. This is a genetic elongated skull. This is not cranial deformation. This is cranial deformation. Smaller skull, flattened at the back. channel, which is a Russian channel. It's very good. Sylvie does great videos. Actually, there are 5 Russian researchers who are working with me to try to get as much evidence and data about the Black Sea, Caspian Sea, and Crimea elongated skulls. Again, they look almost exactly as the Paratus. Everywhere else on the planet, you find cranial deformation, like a normal skull is altered in shape, but it's not as complex as the ones we find in the Black Sea and the Crimea Caspian Sea area. And in terms of Rh negative, that's something that we do. We have to get good samples of ancient blood, which I'm hoping to get very soon. And then we have to find a lab locally in Peru that can do analysis. We did send 2 samples to a laboratory in Cusco, and they refused to test it. So that's what a bit of a piss off is. You have to find a lab that's actually interested in studying this stuff, and one that is open-minded. Well, indigenous people of Peru have a tendency to be smaller than, say, North Americans, partially due to diet, because when the Spanish conquistadors entered the Cusco area, the Sacred Valley is where most of the great food and abundant food was grown. Sacred Valley is about 2,000 feet in altitude below Cusco. So to this very day, it grows incredible amounts of food. But according to my teacher, Teo Paratus, what happened was, as soon as the Spanish established themselves in the Cusco and Sacred Valley area, they kicked the native people out of the area and forced them to live, to create villages at higher altitudes where they couldn't develop as good food as they originally had. So there's no talk in the Spanish chronicles that the Inca themselves were smaller than the Spanish. There's no description of height whatsoever. So they're probably as equally tall, or maybe even taller than the Spanish. And also, even to this day, the Peruvian diet is not that great. Peruvian food, for most Peruvians, is quite simple. But Peru produces basically every kind of food there is. So my wife and I eat very healthily, thanks to the food that's grown here. Okay, well, thank you. Oh, Cumbe Mayo, yes, Cumbe Mayo is a site here. It's in northern Peru. It's a channel that is carved bedrock that is likely 5 miles long. And it's near a city called Cajamarca. So I have videos about Cumbe Mayo on my YouTube channel. Well, I'm very come on tour, but my main endeavor is to get this information out to as large an audience as possible. And so I thank you all for subscribing to my YouTube channel. I think I now have 188,000 subscribers. So it'll be great to get to a point where it's 200,000. Yeah, we're going to be heading to England next month, and we get private access to Stonehenge with Maria Wheatley, who is a researcher in the area. So hopefully I'll be able to do some quadcopter footage there. I haven't been able to do much quadcopter work because of restrictions. Being able to fly drones or quadcopters is becoming more and more of a pain in the neck because of government restriction. But that's why we're trying to find places that are out in the middle of nowhere, ancient megalithic places, so that we can film there without being interrupted. So thank you all so much for joining in with this, and I'll try to do more live streaming, try to do live streaming from Stonehenge if possible. And so once again, yes, actually we're going to Turkey September 2019. We get access to the Cappadocia underground city as well as other places, and of course we're going to Göbekli Tepe and other places like that. So yeah, so just stay tuned to this YouTube channel, and thank you so much to all of you for your interest in what we're doing, and hope to do another live stream with you very soon. Cheers from Paratus.